As promised, our break from reality continues. So, in the last video, we went over how everything from our brains, our psychology, to our culture, to our journalism is ill-fitted to our current situation, is not accurately reflecting it, and this video is going to be about the irrational beliefs and behaviors that inspires, like, out on the streets. There's a phrase that I like from Catton, which is eager self-deception. And you can see here I have that oftentimes hope is really meaning somewhere between ignorant bliss and denial, because either you are completely unaware of the relationships that I described in video 1, or you're like kind of starting to suspect them because they are so clear, but then you're suppressing that awareness. We want the whole civilization blueprint to be compatible with nature, planetary, environmental health, and we want development to be able to last forever. Neither of those things are possible, but it's like we decided in advance that we want them to be true, so they are true, so we've never actually stopped to examine that conviction. We want to believe that, like, there does exist a solution to this riddle, but it's just that people aren't finding the motivation to implement it yet, and their framework just fits awkwardly with reality because it isn't accurate. And so then there's all this cognitive dissonance and inner conflict and stuff. So the term ecomodernist below is real. That is one that you will find out in other parts of the internet. But I invented 2 more terms because the stereotype of ecomodernists is that they are these lovers of high tech. They are like city slickers, but I've found that this other group of people who is like tree huggers, people whose image is maybe a little bit crunchier, they are also in this category of people who have that misunderstanding about civilization. And of course, again, it's not their fault because it's how our brains work and how our culture has brainwashed us. And then all of this poor journalism misleads us as well. And so then I came up with this word, frank environmentalists, because it's like they love the environment, but they also love machines, and they're torn. And then the umbrella for both of them is civili-zealots, because the thing that they are most passionate about is just improving the structure of our whole system, our material intense system that is already just sucking every last bit out of this planet, to just like somehow redeem it, and then hopefully it doesn't have to have this harmful relationship with its environment and it can become this perpetually operating thing. So here's an idea that I originally put into the next video, number 7, but thought it would be good to introduce here as well. So we've gone over a lot of how civilization fundamentally functions. Now we're going to take that a step further to discuss, first of all, what we can't do. So the first thing that we can't do is somehow fix or refashion civilization to be environmentally friendly. There are ways for organisms on planet Earth to meet their survival needs in a way that does not destroy their environment and can therefore persist for a long time. However, that looks like the way that the birds and the trees are behaving outside my window, and it does not look like roads, aqueducts, pyramids, cities, bridges, trains, or large-scale agriculture. Because basically, what we've been doing with this is saying, well, it's like building a brick wall in front of a hockey goal, which is that picture that's there, right? We are redesigning the entire planet as if it belongs to us into a human playground that supports only our survival, and then also claiming all of the land and being like, well, the calories that grow there for us, and also the ones that are there are ours as well, and those too. So naturally, our built infrastructure, as well as our one population and one model of meeting survival needs has spread around the globe, and we have exterminated so many other life forms and human lifestyles, because there were humans living in other ways, meeting their survival needs in other ways, but we've just either eliminated them, absorbed them, and then come and replace them. And then the second thing is this strategy can't last forever. We cannot stack the cards in our favor like this for so long. I've said that it's a trade-off of whenever we build anthropogenic mass and sacrifice the environment, sacrifice natural habitats to keep our civilization model infrastructure and its population going, that incurs consequences that eventually add up, and then we're the ones that lose. Civilization is the thing that will, in the end, go away. It can't work out any other way. And so what that means is that we can't rely on it forever to be meeting our survival needs, whether that means access to things like food and water, and also safety from things like natural disasters, disease, and even the violence of fellow humans. And the third thing is that we cannot expedite its demise. I am fully on board with blocking bulldozers. I go more into that in video 7. I think that is a great choice. But in terms of like bringing down all of modern techno-industrial society, like it doesn't matter how many friends you have behind you, you're not going to do that. You cannot get rid of all the cities around the world. You can't get rid of like large-scale agriculture. And you're also not going to be like, okay, people don't work specialized jobs anymore. Like, not going to happen. And yet, I think with mainstream, the popular vision of climate activism and environmental activism does not take these into account. And it's not that people are not intelligent. I think a lot of activists are. It's just that this goes against everything, the way that our brains are programmed to work and the way that our culture conditions us to think about our presence here on the planet. And also it's overwhelming. It is the end of our world. Now, to be fair, this whole civilization model has only been around for about 12,000 years, and it's been wreaking havoc that whole time, annihilating everyone else's world. But still, it's a lot to absorb. And I think that is evident when you look at the vision that is motivating activists. It's not just a vision simply of a balanced planet where all of the different life, the beings are meeting their survival needs in a truly environmentally friendly way, and there are people, but those people are living in a primitive way. Their vision still includes people living in a civilized way. Because we are still coming from this place of like needing to get everything that we want, and we are the dominator species, and we can't imagine life without this absurdly high maintenance life support system. And so like we bring that baggage all along with us into this vision and are like, well, it's just going to have to fit. It's going to have to accommodate this, even though that violates like basic laws of physics and biology. And that's really why I'm making this series. I think the stereotype about doomers, people who talk about, oh, well, you can't save civilization, they think it's like, oh, we're just people who have given up, or maybe we never liked humanity to begin with, or whatever. But it's actually that we've taken the time to understand the full predicament accurately, and we just understand, like we've drawn conclusions from that, whereas other people who don't expect this, what I've described, just haven't given it as much thought and haven't been had the support to actually even engage in that type of thought. And so the irony is oftentimes, you'll hear activists be like, oh, like if only people were willing to make sacrifices, or, if everyone should just get out and mobilize. And it's kind of like, okay, make sacrifices and mobilize in the name of what? For the sake of what? Normally, it's for everything working out. Like they want to see everything work out according to that vision that I just described, which in fact is still human-centric. And so it's almost like if you've ever had a dream and you think you've woken up, but actually you're still in the dream, and it's just the dream is that you have woken up and you're actually still asleep. That is the state that these activists are in. And what I notice is that it keeps them in that stage of like denial, bargaining, anger, or it often also looks like blame and judgment and frustration, instead of moving on to this sadness and acceptance. And so, as I have here with my little metaphors, they are like locked in to that misunderstanding and leaning in to the panic. And so, what does this dream delirium look like? On to the next slide. So the first one is this reductivism, where we tend to want to identify villains and heroes and go in there with surgical-like precision and remove the bad things and then keep the good things and everything that we like. And we think that that can actually occur smoothly. This is that kind of like black and white problem-solving mode thinking, which it requires dismissing anything that makes the situation too gray area, too complicated, too tricky. And so the problems that we identify correctly are like things like fossil fuel companies and greedy CEOs and capitalism and these frivolous, celebrities and the, Republicans who vote down environmental protections and consumerism and fast fashion and the big meat industry and corporate commercial airlines and plastics and forever chemicals. And that's all true. Those things are all bad. And yet, if you were to remove those, civilization would still be operating the only way that it does, because it's in the definition, where you have population density in cities with the division of labor reliant primarily on agriculture to meet their caloric needs. And that, like, the self-destruction is designed into that blueprint. And so when you think about it, all the other civilizations rose and fell, and they didn't have any of these features. So it can't be that just getting rid of those solves the problem. There's something more fundamental to the way that this whole thing works that is bringing about its downfall. But it's nice to feel like there is someone in control, because then that gives you a problem that you can solve, a person that you can blame and remove. And it's like, okay, we're all on this bus and there's an evil person at the steering wheel, but if we just get them out of the way, then we can steer ourselves to safety. When in fact, there is no steering wheel. No one is in control. We're all kind of powering it collectively simply by participating in civilization. And you're already off the cliff, so you can't steer it to safety, and it's just a matter of time before the whole thing comes crashing down. That is not a fun idea to entertain, and yet is the more accurate one. And it seems to me that civili-zealots have trouble entertaining three thoughts at the same time. The first one is obvious to them, that fossil fuels are causing serious problems on our planet. For sure, absolutely, and that is very true. But the other two truths are that to end burning fossil fuels would create problems for us as well, because without that, you really can't have industrial society and all of these systems that we have become dependent on for survival, especially for all 8 billion of us to survive. And they tend to write this one off by imagining that green energy can be a viable substitute for fossil fuels in all senses, or that even if it can't, well, those ways in which it can't are something that we could just forego without any major consequences, which isn't the case. And then the other thing is the fact that green energy is bad for the environment. Green energy. And I think what I see here is that, like, they'll acknowledge it a little bit and they'll be like, yeah, I know we have to dig mines, but they'll say things like, you can't make an omelet without cracking a few eggs. Like, they'll just dismiss those implications and assume that, well, it probably won't be that significant. But it's not because they're sure or that they've proven that. It's just because they need to believe that it's what it would be convenient if that were true, and so therefore it is what's true. When in fact, the area of the planetary boundaries where we are most in the danger zone is biodiversity loss, and this will make the biodiversity loss even worse for sure, because we can't get the materials for this whole thing without destroying habitats, and we're going to get to find out what kind of consequences that has. And then I noticed, so in fiction, like the climate fiction Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, as well as in the latest movie How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which is based on the nonfiction book by Andreas Malm, you have these eco-terrorists, and they just kind of wreak havoc in select ways. They blow up some jets, they hold some important decision makers hostage, they poison the meat, and then somehow that doesn't erupt in chaos. It actually just leads down the line to where civilization is somehow living harmoniously with its environment. Never mind that that's impossible, and they don't really explain how that this doesn't those actions don't make people panic. So there's this quote by William Catton where he defines magic, and basically like magic is this thing where you don't have to explain how one thing leads to another. We kind of take it as a given. And then when you were actually to inquire into it, you would find out that they aren't sufficient. A doesn't really cause B. You're just assuming that it does. And so that's what a lot of this is. So the next thing is appeals to empire emergent institutions. So these are things like governments and universities, because if you think that a Green New Deal is what we need to get ourselves into the clear and get our happy ending, it won't. But if you do think it will, these are the people to go to because they are the ones in charge. And so, well, first of all, the problem is those things are they grow out of civilization, but without fossil fuels we won't have modern industrial technological civilization. Same goes for as climate change gets worse, we won't have that. And so these things will gradually fade and cease to exist. So whatever programs you want them to implement, who knows if they'll ever be able to complete them. And then the other thing is they're only capable of doing civilization type things like resource extraction. And so like if that's what you want, which shouldn't actually be what you want, but if it is, yeah, sure, you can get them to do that, but that's only going to make things worse. And then also with universities, like their whole thing is that they sell you a bright future. You pay them big money for a degree that is guaranteed to set you up for success. And so they aren't capable of abandoning that marketing ploy, because especially again going back to the maximum power principle, if everyone else is still guaranteeing your children a bright future, then you don't want to be the one institute to say that there isn't one ahead and like we're going to teach them how to trap squirrels. Because even if it is true, even if that would be a useful skill for the future, no one is going to give you their tuition money. And then consequentialist ethics. This is like this backwards logic where, first of all, you settle on the idea without actually submitting it to any examination because it wouldn't actually withstand that examination, that this is the plan that's going to get us a happy ending. And then you work backwards from that. Okay, well, how do we get it done? We go to the government and the universities. And then, well, how do you get them to act the way that you want? Well, you need to be marching and protesting and voting. So any information that doesn't motivate people to march and protest and vote must be bad. I can't figure out if they're actually saying that it's inaccurate. I don't think they come out and do that, but they just kind of like shame you for sharing that information. So whereas once upon a time, what mattered was, is information true or not? And that's what we were concerned with because we were interested in the pursuit of knowledge. Now it's all about, well, what kind of emotions and actions does that information trigger? And it's like, well, now we're getting into the realm of propaganda. And so then naturally, if you do share information that is just too grim, they denounce that because it just makes people start to doubt that this plan is going to work to produce the outcome that we want. And like truth just doesn't matter anymore. It's not a criterion for whether or not you share information. Mass awakening. Mainly, when I hear this, I think of the Great Turning. If you go to my Substack, I have a link to a website about this Great Turning that people are expecting. It is just, I think people are starting to lose their minds. Moving on, selective engagement with indigenous wisdom. So this is where, like, when progressive people who identify as progressive acknowledge that indigenous people have something to offer us. I would agree, because like I've said, in the year 2100 or beyond, if there are any humans to survive, for sure they will be doing it without the support of a civilization. And so therefore they will be much more integrated into the environment. They'll have to be living harmoniously with it, and their footprint will be very low. And indigenous people, before civilization came along and saved them from their primitiveness, they knew how to do that. So yes, they do very much have something to offer, but like the only thing that progressive people want from them, they don't want to admit that that is the future that they are heading towards. They want a reason to believe that that is not. So the things that they will engage with are these very like abstract terms that they can interpret however they want, these metaphorical stories that they can interpret however they want, and all of it is just about getting inspiration and feeling like the things that we want will come true, and the normal that we want to persist can persist, and we don't realize that actually civilization is like the bad guy in the stories. And this guy Kohei Sato, who is in Japan, he wrote a book about degrowth. He literally said, "I'm not advocating that we return to nature." And so, yeah, I think it's all just very like cringy and superficial, the way that we want just like a little bit of a snack of their culture, but at the end of the day, we're all still very intent on the fact that like development is the way to go. And this isn't a matter of intelligence. And I should have made this point back in the psych video, but a lot of these people are very, very smart. It's about stubborn resistance to seeing something that is overwhelming. Like, this is bigger than our own deaths, bigger than our loved ones' deaths. We always knew those were coming eventually. It's the end of our world. Or to be more precise, like one cultural model among many other possibilities, which we've mostly wiped out, for one species, which is reaching like its expiration date. This oversimplistic conception of the predicament allows people to remain in the bargaining phase of grief. Like, if we just do this, and this, and this, and this, and it won't be easy, and we know that, but we can get there to civilization's final golden stage. Oh, and like it's apotheosis, right? Like, Google it. Because that's their vision, right? Like, this whole green vision, it's not about a balanced, harmonious biosphere without civilization. Say civilization needs to be photoshopped into that image, even if it isn't actually compatible. It needs to be jammed in there like a puzzle piece that doesn't actually fit in this puzzle. Never mind that any other creature would be doing fine without it. We need it. For us to feel like a victory for us, or like a satisfying dream to hold on to and give us good feelings while everything else is going badly around us, there needs to be some kind of compromise that accommodates our need to be able to picture our high maintenance life support system as part of all this, so that we can picture ourselves and our kids happily in that picture too. And so, yeah, we need to be able to believe that civilization can continue functioning and supporting us humans who are dependent on it for survival. So mainstream activists all pour their energy into activities that are cathartic and distracting. And you might think, okay, well, so be it. No harm done. But yes, harm done. We will create, as a result of this, an extra layer of tragedy and distress as the civilization model, kind of simultaneously at this point, wrecks the planet and itself deteriorates. Here's why. First of all, informed decision making. Whether or not we realize it, our decisions are based on desired outcomes. We understand, or at least we think we understand, cause and effect relationships, and so we do things that we think will get us to where we want to be. Whether that is as simple as like getting up to go to the fridge because you're hungry and you think that going to the fridge, like you know that there's going to be food there and that will address the feeling of hunger. Solution, right? As well as big life choices and the paths that we think that those choices will put us on. But the fact is that we are misunderstanding causation and we are misunderstanding future circumstances. So, for example, skills. The story is that certain fields, certain specialties are more or less likely to bring future success and security. But in fact, a lot of the ones that we elevate right now, are going to end up very obsolete in the not too far future. And it's possible that the conditions are going to be so harsh that like no skills are going to be able to help you, but at least there's a chance. At least you could be trying to put your precious time and energy into gaining experience in fields that could eventually serve you. But because we resist the knowledge of that's what the future is going to look like and that's what it's going to take, we're investing in the wrong things when we could be investing in the right things as individuals. The next thing that we do as individuals as a result of these inaccurate expectations that we just hold on to, as opposed to allowing them to be informed by what we can know, we're moving to locations that might seem attractive now, like Arizona or Florida or any big city. But the thing is that without consistent electricity to power air conditioning or abundant fuel for food to be grown and trucked to you, those places are going to become less comfortable at best. And when will people get that memo? Are they going to leave when it's still possible to take a U-Haul? Or are they going to wait until the abundant fuel is gone and no one is buying homes in that area anymore, so they're having to leave without being able to sell their home and be walking on foot with just whatever they can carry on their backs? Again, unnecessary tragedy. Partner selection. So we all remember how during COVID, those circumstances, the various circumstances, right? Because we all became aware of a lot of crises at once, put pressure on couples. And this is going to be like that, except like way, way magnified. And there's going to be no relief at the end. It's not like there's a light at the end of the tunnel that, okay, we're going to go back to normal and things are going to open up. Like, this is just a long decline for the rest of our lives. And maybe you're dating someone right now and you're not aware of this, so you're not keeping it top of mind. And you realize that like their one weakness is that this person does not handle stress well. But you're like, you know what? Everything else about them is so great. I can let that slide. And they're not going to be like a really great apocalypse buddy, right? So that might lead to, again, unnecessary stress in the future that you could have avoided if you kept these things in mind, which requires fixing them in the first place. And the next thing is kids. Like, if you have a kid in the 2020s, whatever happens for the rest of this whole century, you are putting their name on the sign-up sheet to experience that. And lots of parents, I understand, don't actually realize how bad it's going to be. Like, until 2 years ago, I didn't realize like that the whole thing is coming down. The information isn't out there, or like it's available, but there isn't anything except for this video series encouraging you to like look at it all together and realize where it's going to be leading us over time. So I get it. They're not doing it intentionally. But I think specifically for people who were kind of unsure and then they were like, meh, let's choose the optimistic move. In 20 years, it's going to be clear that this ride the junior is now strapped into is not a fun one. And again, that's going to yield extra bad feels for everyone. Next thing, your morale. There's this thing called the Stockdale paradox. So this guy, Stockdale, he was a Vietnam prisoner of war. And they tortured him. I mean, like you can Google it and look at the Wikipedia. The stuff that he went through was insane. But he was one of the few people who survived and actually got out in the end, whereas a lot of people didn't make it out. They actually died. And someone later interviewed him about it. And they were like, what was the difference between you, like what defined who wasn't going to make it out? Who didn't? And he goes, oh, that's easy. The optimists. Like, those were his little words. And he says they died of a broken heart because he was more stoic and his discipline was just a matter of like, I'm going to wake up today and breathe and do the things that I need to do just because, and not because I'm expecting some kind of outcome. And so if your reason for getting up in the morning and doing the things you're going to do, or the way that you motivate yourself to feel like doing that, is a matter of like, today will be the day, like the people in the cell with him would say, today's going to be the day that we're going to get rescued. And then inevitably, because that's not the way that the world was working, they didn't get rescued, and eventually that didn't work for them anymore. And the same thing here. Like, this might be the expectation that tomorrow is going to be the day that you're going to see some good news, and like big good news, that like really the earth appears to be recovering and civilization is still chugging along. You're not going to get that. It's just going to get worse and worse. how's that going to go? How are the, like, those people are going to experience a load of frustration and then ultimately like devastation, and you're going to have to either find something new or like, I don't know it. Because again, the state of the earth, the planet and the environment, and the state of civilization are a trade-off. So one can't get better without the other getting worse. And for now, the track that we're on is civilization is getting better and it's making the planet worse. And then eventually that will switch and the planet will get better, but only because civilization is then getting worse. So you're never going to get both. And then the next thing is that this inspires conflict within communities, because if you have, this has to do with the people who are extra passionate about saving the planet, but they don't understand that it's a trade-off and you can't have one or the other or both. So they actually think that there's a way to like win with everything, and that there's actually some that, you know, we could all be doing something that would contribute to that win-win for all. And if they are part of that vision of theirs and their ability to hold onto that vision, which, preceding point, is allowing them to like live their lives without just falling down in despair. Every time they don't see people cooperate, that's an opportunity to just place blame and project frustration and project anxiety, and it doesn't, that doesn't lead to anything good. It, like, if people, because there would be less conflict if people, among people, if we would all just acknowledge that civilization is the thing causing the problem and we are all participating it, and because none of us is going to collectively, we aren't all going to just stop participating in it. This is the track that we're on, and it is what it is. There is just unnecessary tension in those types of communities that involve the people who are particularly desperate for this all to work. And then the final thing is this valid criticism and distrust. So I happened to listen, and I swear I don't do this normally, I listened to Tucker Carlson in an interview. And he was talking about how all he sees is liberals just buying all this clean technology and their clean electric vehicles and dining in their vegan restaurants, but like, there's no sacrifice. That doesn't seem right. Shouldn't this involve some kind of sacrifice? And they also, like, there isn't any concern about like actual habitats. He's like, how often do you see any of them planting a tree? Which, like, planting trees doesn't always work either, but forget that. And so, like, it's true. I think that eventually liberals, this story that they're telling on behalf of civilization, is going to prove to be false. It's not going to work to deliver the happy ending that everyone is expecting. Everything is going to continue to get worse. The resources are going to go into decline, and it isn't in anyone's power to make those become more abundant once the crunch is on. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of scapegoating, and certain groups, many various demographics, take your pick, I'm sure everyone will get their turn, are going to be persecuted. And to a certain degree, that is going to be inevitable. Earth has never seen this much population pressure before. Like, we've seen conflicts and we've seen tension and competition, but we've never seen it on this scale. And like, what's going to come. But I think that that is going to be worse than it otherwise would have been because of this illusion that the liberal pro-technology clean energy thing is people are promoting, because it is going to betray people. And then all those people who are maybe on the fence and like they wanted the right thing, but then they aren't going to be able to believe in that anymore, and then they aren't going to know what to believe in anymore, and nothing is going to make sense. And if they don't hear this stuff that I'm telling you, then like, what conspiracy theory extremism are they going to gravitate to next? So everything's going to unravel, and it's all going to be a lot crazier because of this hopefulness. I have beef with so many people, so let's get started. Bill McKibben, he's the founder of 350.org. He is the face of elder climate activists. He has some books, and as well as, he writes for magazines and whatnot. And I just don't understand how someone who has been doing this full time for so many years fails to grasp something that 5-year-olds could. So, a quote, "We're in a moment when it's possible to imagine in relatively short order humans ending large-scale combustion on planet Earth. It's no longer strictly necessary. We now know how to take advantage of the fact that the good Lord hung a big ball of burning gas 93 million miles away. Does he not understand that we need equipment to get that done? And so just because there's this big ball of burning gas, like first we have to do a ton of material extraction and a ton of fossil fuel burning to get from here to there. Like that seems like if you were advocating for that type of a plan, you would think you at least understand the basics of what it entails, but apparently not. Then let's see, the turtle on the bottom, that's Amory Lovins. He is the Einstein of energy efficiency. In 1976, he offered Jimmy Carter's government a blueprint for how to triple energy efficiency and get off coal and oil within 40 years. 40 years later, obviously, well, Carter was voted out of office, and we have never implemented that. So thank you very much. And of course, from video number 2, I didn't do a great job explaining efficiency, but if you go to my Substack, post 2.3, I explain, or somebody else explains, there's a great video of why efficiency actually makes things worse. And he has said in an interview with Yale, well, they asked him, they said, given that we're in the midst of what could only be described as a fossil fuel boom, with the discovery of new unconventional sources and new oil sources being found all over the world, how do you speed this transition and get from here to there? And he just goes, well, I'm not sure what boom you're talking about. Okay, thanks, dude. And then they say certainly in China, India, and the developing world, there's a fossil fuel boom going on. And there he, budges a little bit. But in a global context, there's a remarkable boom in efficiency and renewables in China, the world leader in 5 renewables. Part of the story in China is that the extraordinary vitality of renewables is coming very largely from the vibrant private sector. Well, fast forward from when this interview took place in 2012 to 2024, and there's an article, a headline that came out that China leads global coal power surge as capacity hits record. So he is just choosing to be aware of only what he wants to be aware of. He also, way back when, wrote a Guardian article where he said, the UN's International Energy Agency expects renewables to generate 90% of all new power in the coming years. The energy revolution has happened. Sorry if you missed it. Fast forward, fossil fuels are still providing 84% of all of the world's energy needs. All of renewables have barely been expanding at all in the past few years. Then we have Christina Figueres, who was part of the 2015 Paris Accords, since which everything has been getting worse. So thank you very much, Christiana. And here are some quotes from her during an interview on the podcast called On Being. She says things like, climate change is the gym in which we as human beings are strengthening our muscle to be able to evolve to a much higher sense of awareness than before, measured in the way that we understand our relationship with nature. Of course, she's still promoting renewable energy and the manufacturing of all of this industrial equipment, which, when that fails, we are going to have a very new relationship with nature, but I don't think that's the one that she has in mind. She also says things like, with our thoughts, we create the world, and that there's a ridiculous barrier between, well, she doesn't think that there's a barrier between spiritual reality and physical reality. So and then she also says, we're not talking about wishful thinking. We're talking about deciding that it doesn't have to be this way. That sounds like wishful thinking to me. So, things are the way that they are, and you don't change it by deciding that they aren't that way. Really just seems like this entitlement and inflated sense of control that we have in human civilization because we've just been getting what we want for so long at the cost of all other species. And then she says, same thing, similar to Bill McKibben, let's be thankful to the oil and gas industry that powered at least half the world and gave creature comforts to half the world. We no longer need you. We now have better technologies that can power the full world. Where does she expect that those are coming from? How are we obtaining the materials from them? How are we transporting them, manufacturing them, all of that? That isn't going to be possible without burning fossil fuels. And then also if the fossil fuels go away because geophysics is preventing us from extracting them, we aren't going to be able to pull this off. But like, she isn't making that connection. And it seems like what I've said in my previous video about this idea of peak oil demand, when we become too good for fossil fuels, we are so ready already to reject them and write them off when we aren't even, like, we're not nearly done needing them to accomplish the things that we even aspire to accomplish. Not that those things are going to give us the happy ending that we want anyway, but like, Jesus. Next up, let's say Greta Thunberg and George Monbiot. So these are like people who are in support of, Fridays for Future, Extinction Rebellion, somewhat affiliated with them. Obviously, both are into protesting and getting arrested. Greta Thunberg had this Guardian article that she wrote where she denounced biomass as a fuel, like deforestation, which is good because it is habitat destruction, and her concerns are correct, especially if we are chopping down trees faster than they can grow back. But then she was arguing for the fact that the European Parliament needs to invest only in true renewables. And I guess that what she has in mind are the sun and the wind, because how could you possibly think that metal and minerals, that digging those up is any more of a renewable or like a repeatable process than chopping down trees? Like, you run out of the metals and minerals in the same way that you can chop down the trees too fast. And it's like, it's weird because she's known for having done this deep dive into climate change, and yet she apparently didn't flip the page to understand like ecology and how all of that works. And then finally, I'm going to skip Monbiot. I write about him, his tweets. It's just the standard anti-fossil fuel stuff, not realizing that we can't have renewable energy without fossil fuels, and that also renewable energy is detrimental to the environment, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, Scott Galloway, he might seem like a misfit here, but he is this NYU professor who talks about economics and stuff, and I believe that he belongs in this pantheon because he is just another person who is pointing out a specific little thing, indicating to people that, like, oh, if we fix this, and if they work on that, and if we all work on the solutions that we are focused on, then it'll all add up to a happy ending. Not the case. And here he is, blaming the country for young people's future. But like, no matter what, today's young people are not going to have a future that looks anything like today does, and there isn't anything that we can do to guarantee them one that does look like today, because that had ecological material extraction underpinnings that we can no longer continue. Then I also mentioned that although I agree with the spirit of degrowth and am down with permaculture, there in like the mainstream discussion of it in degrowth, there are some strains of it that indicate that, like, oh yeah, we should be expanding renewable energy, which of course I'm not aligned with, as well as, permaculture. I've heard at least one major instructor say that, like, oh, this is a thing that is viable in cities. I don't think that people are going to be able to meet their caloric needs in cities, no matter how good you get at identifying or like growing plants in the cracks of the sidewalk. So I'm not down with that. So now in this group, we have, for starters, the anti-doomer contingent. The constipated guy on the left, Michael Mann, along with journalist Rebecca Solnit, have used the term inactivist, which goes back to the concept of consequential ethics, that they've already decided that the thing, first of all, that the desired outcome is possible, which it does not. And then from there, well, the way that you get the thing that is going to solve, supposedly, all of our problems is by marching in the streets. And so they want to see more people being activists. And if you have any information that makes people feel some type of emotion that does not drive them to go be marching, then something about what you've said must be wrong, as opposed to just like holding it up to facts. So that's their stance. Mann also, well, he's coming out with an entire book where he rails against anti-doomers, or rails against doomers. And I have screenshots of recent tweets on my Substack from him where he was trying to argue for the fact that the record-breaking heat that we've experienced recently must be a fluke and isn't indicative of anything. And basically his rationale is that, like, since the data doesn't match with our models, it must be the data that's wrong. This must be a weird exception, but eventually the climate is going to get back to behaving the way that we want it to, as opposed to the way that like all the climate scientists and everyone are interpreting it, which is that like our models must be wrong. We must be our predictions and the things that we're using to try to understand the climate, like our understanding is what's wrong. But from his perspective, it's like our understanding can't be wrong. The climate is what needs to just get back in line with what we want from it. And then Hannah Ritchie is part of this latest generation of anti-doomers. She literally recently came out with a book that was called Not the End of the World. And then she also wrote an article a few years ago called Stop Telling Kids They'll Die from Climate Change. She herself wants to have kids. She has made that clear. And it was basically like, well, reality wasn't really compatible with what she wants to feel good about doing. So she's just not going to have anything to do with it anymore. And so I have listed a number of the arguments that she makes in her article and then explained how they relate to all of these logic tricks that people like this use. And so if you want the bullet by bullet takedown of all of everything that she says, it's there. Ezra Klein. So he's also someone that wants to make sure that you are having kids. But first of all, he has a book coming out called Abundance, What Progress Takes. And basically, this is, again, some like backwards logic similar to man's. And it's like, well, we want to be making progress, by which he means just making civilization continue running and become more and more advanced, which always has negative impacts on the rest of the planet, because where do we get the materials for that? But therefore, I think the connection that he's implying here is that because progress requires abundance, the abundance will come into existence. But like, no, it works the other way around, kind of like Catton said, or like I was explaining where I said that you engage in colonialism to obtain resources, but also you need resources to engage in colonialism. And once they go away, you can't practice that and have an empire anymore, or any of the things that it makes possible, all those institutions. So it's too bad for him. He also has a quote from a column where he says, conversation about climate changes are pretty depressing, but decarbonizing doesn't mean accepting a future of less. It can mean a more awesome, humane, technologically rich, and socially inspiring future for us all. So for the people that just want to be told that everything is okay, he is ready to sell you some books that will prove that to you. He's also said, we have done so much to build a seawall between us and the pitiless world. We've done so much to make the future better than the past. To give back any portion of those gains, or even to prevent the progress we could otherwise see, is worse than a tragedy. It's a crime. And so here, this is so aligning with my analogy of civilization as space station parked on Earth, because it does separate us from nature as opposed to being integrated with nature, interacting with it directly to meet our survival needs. We interact with it through the pods and the robot arms, and he really wants to remain hiding, sheltered within his pod. And unfortunately, just because you want something doesn't mean it's going to be possible for him to get it. And yeah, just kind of presenting the outside world, the environment, as being so harsh, when actually it seemed to be working pretty well for every other organism. And what's not working well for the organisms is human civilization. And he doesn't realize that his mission is actually at odds. Like when he says like, oh, we've done so much to make the future better than the past. It's like, have we? Except for like the extinction and the fact that we are driving ourselves further into climate chaos. Are you sure it's actually better? Is it still better? And then he says things like, the wind doesn't stop blowing because an autocrat has a tantrum. Harnessing the solar radiation that bathes our world doesn't leave us in hock to the house of sod. And it's like, correct, we don't rely on other countries for the wind to blow and the sun to shine. That being said, the wind doesn't always cooperate and the sun doesn't always cooperate. They are actually pretty volatile. And then also to harness them, we do rely on other countries because we need equipment, which is made from metals and minerals, which are found around the world. So like, I don't know how these people delude themselves so well. And then finally, We face a political problem, not a physics one. The green future has to be a welcoming one, even a thrilling one. And it's just like all about just marketing to people what they want to hear and telling them whatever it is that is going to get them on board with your program. Never mind if your program is actually legitimately going to do what it says that it will for them. I'm done with this guy. Anyway, on to two that are actually related. Paul Hawken, who has 2 books about how we can solve everything, as well as a TED Talk, and Kim Stanley Robinson on the end, who wrote Ministry for the Future. So you would think, what do these two have to do with each other? One is nonfiction and one is fiction. But the thing is, they both use actual facts. They're both really well researched and talk about real things and real programs. And then they allow you to believe that those few small wins that are occurring for the environment in places will add up to an overall victory. And they don't acknowledge like what the depletion of what our declining access to fossil fuels, how that plays into this, or how they managed to make a civilization that has minimal ecological impact, or the fact that all the consequences of our behaviors are adding up to more than the positives. And so, but they're counting on you. They might not come out and lie directly to you, but they are trusting you to make the connections that like, oh, all of these little positive things will result in a happy ending, which they will not. And then former Vice President Al Gore is back on the trail, just not the campaign trail, just making speaking engagements and railing against fossil fuel companies. And finally, the creepiest page of our yearbook, the Ecomodernists. So this is a group of people, they're like formally organized, and they are based out of institutes, some of which are affiliated with universities. And that part creeps me out about them. And also the fact that because people like Elon Musk are so extreme with what they're saying, like they're saying, oh, we're going to go settle Mars and multiply into the trillions in space, like that's crazy. And then in comparison, this craziness actually doesn't seem so insane. And so people buy into it. It is very seductive. And so their insight is that like most people don't want to change. We really like our consumerism in developed countries, and then developing countries eventually want to have developed status. And so their thing is all about like no behavioral change, which is granted, I will agree that that's unrealistic, but then they think that we can just achieve everything through more and more advanced machinery and more chemicals, which also isn't going to work because as our access to fossil fuels starts to decline now, we aren't going to have the energy to maintain supply chain or like world order, which is necessary to support all of the programs that they were planning to administer. So this isn't going to pan out either, which is probably okay because even if it did, it would obviously just put more pressure on the planet, not alleviate it. And yeah, also on my Substack, I have links to some like exposés on them. This guy, Mark Linus, especially has a pretty bad record of, you know, misrepresenting information. So yeah, they're creepy and I don't like them. So I hope that you have enjoyed this tour. Hopefully it was at least a little bit informative, if not entertaining. And I can only imagine how much more like erratic and irrational people's beliefs and behaviors will become as the situation continues to unravel.